talk about staffing issues in with utilities. In particular, I know the people on this call are familiar with the shortage of skilled operational technology professionals at a time when we really need them. So, our group today is going to discuss solutions for filling those roles, in particular, potentially retraining IT professionals to step into operational technology roles. And they bring experience in this and will share best practices and strategies for specifically for the utility section, specifically for the people on this call, and help equip you with approaches to bridge these workforce gaps and strengthen your staffing resiliency. So we have we have three folks joining us. We have David Strom and Tim Mather, and then Jared. I won't say her name right. Tatro, with Jacobs Engineering. So David, Tim, and Jared. And then before we get going, if you have questions, the best approach is to put them into the chat, and I'll monitor that and ask the questions as we're going. So, guys, I'll interrupt you if we have questions, and then then of course we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Great. Very much appreciate you guys taking the time to join us and for the association for hosting. Let me get to work here sharing my presentation and then we can kick it off. Have you guys ever had this experience where the Zoom thing covers up the only part of the menu that you want to get to? Okay. So I am Tim Mather. We're joined by David Strom, who's a SCADA specialist within SBS, and Jared, who is with Jacobs and is a SME among SMEs. I've gotten to know him over the last year, and he's got talent for all the underlying technology plus the practical application, and he's going to be able to get into areas that are much more detailed than I can. So I'm going to kind of set us up, just talk about the overall issue that we see and some of the underlying studies that we've reviewed, and then how we've designed a process for, we hope, alleviating some of the shortage of OT talent and also enabling the retention of experienced IT talent within the organization. So that's kind of the push. Jared, why don't you just take us a minute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name's Jared Tatro. I've worked for Jacobs Engineering for 15 years now. Everything SCADA, a lot of OT and cybersecurity, virtualization of servers, SCADA software, and that's pretty much what I do.
Cool. David?
Sure. David Strom. I come from the utility sector for the most part. There was some banking and retail, but primarily all the areas I've always worked with has been typically mission critical solutions and systems. So I've kind of focused on that most of my career. The last 18 years was at Pacific Core, and helping manage the OT IT relationship and guiding through, well, over 18 years, there were 3 big upgrades to our SCADA system. So I've done it a few times.
Cool. In my own background, I have a lot of tech background and did quite a bit of work in OT in the manufacturing environment, and some work in water, wastewater as well with OT. So let's kick it off. So the overall problem that we saw is that there is a staffing shortage, which you guys probably already know, but has been documented through studies as well, of OT talent, and that it's going to get worse over the next few years. At the same time, we see cloud adoption in utilities going up, which means that some of the roles, classic IT roles, are being made redundant, and those folks are losing their roles at the utility. So what we did is we developed a program to help retrain folks who have a lot of the existing expertise that they need in IT world, to retrain them so that they can be operational in the OT world, which then has a number of benefits that I'll go through, and then we can talk specifically. David will speak to the actual program that we put together, and Jared will speak to some of his experience in the trenches, literally and figuratively, I guess, the trenches. But okay, so industry context. There is a SCADA historically has been kind of its own unique separate area in IT, and was not tremendously popular, like not a growth industry for a lot of folks. But that has really been changing, in part because the actual protocol that people are using for communications is moving to a packet-driven protocol from some of the old non-standard modem or wireless protocols that they used to use. On top of that, there are more and more digital IoT functions that can be integrated, so more devices. And also, because it's packet driven, there are new security concerns that have to be considered as you deploy these items. So all of those are creating a rising demand for the talent that will support this infrastructure in the coming years. Some background on that, and I have references at the end of the slide deck that will show you where these studies came from. But SCADA market is going to grow 6.8% to 13.28 billion by 2031, and I think part of that is this, improvement in IoT functionality and the ability to do things that you couldn't do in the past using SCADA. OT demand is expanding across the grid, especially in cybersecurity and automation. Everybody's looking for a more efficient way to do it, but as you know, we have to protect the infrastructure, and as you introduce a packet-driven world for OT, then you get more and more cyber risks that have to be dealt with. And then IT staff roles are declining because utilities are moving from data center-based in-house operations to cloud-based operations. And so those are some of the big trends that we're seeing that are driving some of what we're thinking about. So what is the impact of cloud adoption when a utility moves from their own resources internally to cloud-based? Well, one thing is they're going to have to retrain some of these IT folks or release them, right? And that's not good for a number of reasons. They lose institutional history, they lose local workforce, their own ratepayers that are supporting the utility. So that's our goal, is to help the utilities work through this process and retain some of their IT folks to fill some of their OT gap. Okay, so why is this happening? Why is there this shortage? Folks are aging out. The OT area, which has always been so separate, hasn't been a growth area, and folks tend to stay in it for a long time. It's a specialized area of knowledge. So having a field-ready, tech-savvy staff person, that's getting harder and harder to do. You got plenty of IT folks, maybe they understand a firewall configuration or something, but maybe not the implications of turning off a port in a firewall that then shuts down your SCADA network, as an example. And then all this can cause project delays and also cybersecurity risks, neither of which are good for the utility as a whole, or for even the customers of the utility. So what happens through this process if we don't mitigate it? We're going to have layoffs due to data center closures, loss of institutional knowledge on the part of the folks from IT who are leaving, very limited reassignment within the IT infrastructure because most of that work is going to be third-partied. And then there's a negative impact just on the communities when their own staff and ratepayers get laid off. That's not good for the community that the utility serves. So, what is a good strategic response that we put together? Take the existing skill set that IT folks have, as well as domain familiarity. You know, utilities tend to have a lot of vertical information that's unique to them. So it's not the same as if you were working in retail or working in banking. It's a different set of considerations, and they already have that information. Reducing costs compared to external hiring. If we take these existing IT folks and we move them over, they're going to cost less than finding a new person. Plus, you already know them. You know who the good performers are. They have a good track record. They understand the organization. You get to retain all that institutional knowledge. Historically, IT and OT have been very separate, and they've been kept separate for a reason, for security reasons, so that the SCADA network was less penetrable, less available for attacks, and more reliable. But I think that as the infrastructure itself transitions into more of a packet-driven world, that siloing is not as helpful. And it's probably going to be a big benefit to the organization in the long run to have folks who are familiar with both the IT infrastructure within the organization and also the SCADA system. So this last one enhances benefit realization via career continuity. If you think about it, if you've told your IT group that you're closing the data center and that in X number of months they're going to be laid off, then they don't have a lot of incentive to really make this a successful transition. On the other hand, if you say we have this pathway to keep you employed and to give you new opportunities within the organization, then you're giving them a reason to help you be successful in this process. And in our own practice at SBS with change management, we find that it's under-recognized importance that you get people on board supporting the change. Otherwise, the change tends to go more slowly and less successfully. So, what are the benefits of this strategic response that we're proposing? Alleviate OT staffing shortages with minimal onboarding, right? These folks have already been through the background checks. They're already familiar with the rules and regulations of the organization, and you already know who they are. Reduces resistance to change among the existing IT staff because they know they're going to have a future with your organization. Supports the cloud strategy by integrating knowledgeable teams. So you'll still have with the organization folks who know the systems that have been moved over to the cloud if you need to reference back to them. Project success gets enhanced through the digital transformation ROI. What we're saying there is that if the IT group is enthusiastic about making this change happen to the cloud, then the organization as a whole is going to benefit by more rapid adoption of the new technology. And promoting alignment between IT and OT, which traditionally have been very separate organizations, but because of changes in technology, now a lot of the same information is needed for both groups. So how do you do it? We have developed IT to OT training programs to help folks make that transition. you know, the big difference in IT and OT, one of our folks said this, is that in IT they say, you know, break it, fix it fast. And in OT they say, don't break it. So that's one of the big mind shifts that you have to make for folks when they're moving over to OT. Benefit realization support, change management. We understand these projects, we understand the resistance points and how to overcome them and how to encourage people through the process for successful adoption. And we can help the organization figure out, given their roadmap for SCADA, what would be the most effective kind of approach to retraining folks and what makes the most sense. So we have that experience already, and we can help organizations navigate those choppy waters. So the summary, the IT to OT gap is real, and it's a risk to the organizations, but also an opportunity. And utilities can turn this impending staffing crisis into a strategic advantage by retraining and retaining existing high quality staff. And that moves us on to the next level, which is David, our internal SCADA expert. David, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to briefly talk about we've built a class that we put people through that give them the familiarity with OT and understanding the differences, et cetera. So I'm just going to go through some of those points with this. The convergence, enhanced security and AI integration. As OT is moving forward, IT had to ramp up security and availability like never before. You think of applications like Uber. You don't want to request a car and then have an app crash, right? I mean, so there's IT has become a lot more focused on that high level of availability and never being down that they really didn't have to do 10 years ago, you know. So as this world adopts and changes into that aspect of things, also the OT world is integrating the IT technologies. And that's the next one. The OT integrates IT technologies and AI. There are more and more applications for understanding the power grid or the pipeline or whatever it is you're controlling, and using AI to recognize and understand when there's anomalies and things that you can catch that you never had the opportunity before. But in order to do that, you need to move into more of the IT standard type technologies. You need the Windows environment. You need the other things. You can't just rely on an old system that is running VMware or not VMware, VM. And from that perspective, both are kind of coming to each other and understanding what's going on. Almost all of the new SCADA systems and things that are out there are all Windows based now, where they used to be proprietary. They had proprietary databases, they had proprietary protocols. They're all moving to IP. They're all moving to standard SQL or Oracle or other databases. So as those come together, it's kind of interesting. The blending of the two is going to improve industrial operations in the environment. It's also going to make things different. Those people that used to do it the old way are going to have to change, just like IT's had to learn how to do that as well, and the same thing with improved security. Let's go to the next slide. SCADA real world process control and safety. So SCADA is about real-time critical systems and controls along with public safety. IT was mostly about business, about numbers, financial results, getting payroll out, kind of those things. But like I said, as we've moved into Uber, IT's always had some elements of that critical. Think of the air traffic controllers running that system. That's absolutely critical. And so from that perspective, there's always been IT people in that, but they've always kind of been separate from the standard economies of scale IT. And now those economies of scale IT, they're moving their scale to the cloud. And now they got to start paying attention. How do we make this highly available, extremely available, zero downtime? So they're moving in that world. Those two are coming together, which is kind of interesting. Business efficiency and data management was mostly IT's practice for the most part. And then a downtime SCADA can be catastrophic. When SCADA is down, whether it be a small or a big thing, it could be a small dam that you're running SCADA on. But when that dam fails, that could be a critical issue. Absolutely catastrophic from that perspective. Sewer, water, energy, etc. The next slide is projects, constraints, and deliverables. SCADA demands 7x24 reliability. It's interesting because SCADA has leaned into the hardware for logic and control and industrial networks, and not necessarily running much software as you want it programmed in the hardware. So that if a network's unavailable, if things aren't around, there's some logic and some controls in the device that can automatically make individual decisions without having to have the main controller sometimes available. That's been interesting because that hasn't been something that IT has ever really focused on. Everything is always centralized on one box. Not necessarily true when you're in the SCADA world. So that hardware is typically older. There are new stuff that's coming out there. They're starting to run on IP protocols. They're starting to run on standard IT technologies. Some of them are standard running IT boxes, Unix or other components. IT typically has been software and infrastructure, and then the hardest part was usually user training, because the back end parts for IT typically has been, again, economies of scale. You could build 100 servers. They're all running pretty much the same. They're all the same operating system. That was easy. Now that you're moving into the SCADA world, things are a little bit different for both the SCADA world and for IT, understanding those elements. And the last piece was SCADA testing, hardware in the loop. One thing that I learned very quickly on, and that was, if you've got a big network working for Pacific Core, we're covering 6 states, and we had 3 control zones, and there's no way you could replicate that environment with, 10,000 points of control. You just can't replicate that easily in anywhere. So a lot of the testing and a lot of the things that take place in SCADA is testing on the live environment. That's something that IT would never do. IT would replicate a system, and then they'd put together a system that could act like 10,000 users and just pound the daylights out of the system and see if it tested all right. Doesn't work that way in SCADA. So there's areas that people need to learn and understand from the IT world, but there's also some of those elements that could be leveraged from IT to help make that a little bit easier. And then site acceptance testing. IT usually tests in a complete separate environment when they do their final testing, and then they move to production. A lot of SCADA, you don't have that opportunity again, so you're doing acceptance on site. You're doing it in the actual environment that you're going to, have to control and work with. So there's some precautions and some great understanding you need to have to understand how you can do that and minimize any kind of damage or problems when you are testing on your current live system. Next one, SCADA uses legacy protocols and long-term support. So, there's still a lot of these protocols out here. When I was at Pacific Core, we were trying to get down to at least under 10 protocols in the environment. Companies grow organically. They keep acquiring and buying a new one and buying this chunk and adding that. We had 3 control zones. We had probably 20 different protocols. So we had to have a system that would just sit there and look at a protocol and translate it into what was needed. So there's a whole world around that you just don't have in the IT world that you have to consider, and that not having upgraded for a long time. Most SCADA systems run for 10, 15, 20 years and just run and run and run. There's not a lot that needs to change. Well, those systems are going away. The new technologies are coming in, and guess what? They're Windows, they're Unix, they're standard IT systems. Now they're going to need patching. They're going to need things to watch for security issues and controls around that environment. It's going to be very different. IT systems change every 3 to 7 years, typically 3. 7 is pretty long for most IT systems. You're pretty well out of whack at that point. And again, SCADA sometimes is 15, 20 years before you change to a new system. And then change management in SCADA is highly formalized. In the SCADA environment, you don't change unless you have to, typically is what went on. But again, as we're moving to more Windows-based systems, the have-to changes because Windows announces a security risk. You need to do something about it. You cannot continue to operate like you used to in the past. So we need to make sure that there's a well managed and well-designed change management solution for your SCADA environment. And that's something else that we help people move from IT to OT and understand. Risk management and security. SCADA prioritizes safety and availability. SCADA risks are regional, state, even nationwide. I mean, if you look at, there's been a couple times it's happened where air traffic controller systems had a glitch, and guess what? All airports are shut down. Pretty critical. It's not necessarily specifically SCADA, but it's a similar environment. It's exactly like that for a lot of people. PacifiCorp, we were 6 states. If we had a serious issue, it would impact 6 states. Pretty big deal from that perspective. And the results of that can be environmental. Something's damaged, and look at just take the Valdez oil spill in the Alaska Territory that went on up there. That took years and years and years and years and tons of dollars, millions of dollars, and correcting that. So an environmental risk is a big deal, whereas typical IT systems, it is not. Typical IT systems are focused on data breaches and outages, and you recover quite quickly and you're back up and running. That oil spill wasn't recoverable quickly, and it cost a lot of money for a long time. So same thing if you're running a pipeline, whether it's pushing oil or pushing natural gas or water, sewer, whatever. That's pretty critical from that perspective. SCADA's always created segments and communications on their networks just by the inherent nature of the technologies that you use and that you chose. But those technologies are all moving again to the IP-based protocols. They're moving to standard IT technologies because those companies want to leverage economies of scale as well. Why constantly produce an RTU or a in the field control system that is good for a few years and then you're going to do another one and do it differently? Go to something you can leverage, whether it be gas, electric, oil, food processing, warehouse controls, whatever it is. Go to a standard solution that you can manage and use those economies of scale with using the Windows devices. And some of them are even using other modified Unix versions or clipped Unix versions, etc. But the other thing that SCADA has typically done is they've delayed patching. If you can't get to it from the internet, do you have to patch it? Well, not necessarily, but that's typically an approach that's been taken. But more and more people want that data. More and more business people want the SCADA data available. Getting it there, making the holes open so that you can move data back and forth starts to open up possible segments. And then you start to pay attention to patching a little bit more. You need to understand where those issues are. And then the last one is key takeaways for SCADA managers. SCADA projects must build on the real-time reliability of systems and processes as the project moves forward. Basically, what we're saying is they really need to understand the real-time needs and what is there, and they need to build on those processes as they move forward, even if they're using IT-type hardware or equipment. One of the key things that becomes an issue is typically network stuff is done by network. The SCADA teams usually didn't do a lot of standard IP networking and security and all those tools, firewalls, etc. They're typically run in the IT world best just because they've had so many years experience with it now, and they're dealing with the internet every single day. From that perspective, a collaboration between IT and OT is absolutely essential. You really need to make sure those two groups are working. And typically, they've kind of been at odds with each other because IT sees their world and OT sees their world. And they're not a direct match. They are different. And so from that perspective, finding that relationship and building it between the two is pretty critical. It's also what allows you to move your IT people into OT or vice versa at some point in time. And then testing and documentation are critical for a long-term success. And I couldn't repeat this enough. I've went into too many SCADA systems throughout the years and said, well, why does this decision get made here? Why is this happening? I don't know. Bob did it that way 20 years ago, and that's the way we've always run it. And so if you're looking at that, tribal knowledge is not documentation. It's not the process. It's not, and unfortunately, in that world where you've got a lot of engineering that has to be done, there's not a lot of focus on the documentation, and the long-term success starts to wane because suddenly 15 years later, when 3 people retired and you want to know why something's doing what it's doing, nobody's got it. Nobody knows. And do you need to learn the same problem all over again? Well, if it was documented well, you don't have to. You should be able to go read it and understand it from that perspective. So that's something that IT's done quite well through the years, that OT seems to kind of put to the side and make it a second priority. But I'll tell you what, that testing and documentation, not only documentation, but the testing documentation and what the results were, so that when you're going forward in the future, you can say, oh, here's what they tested for. Maybe I can think about why they made that decision if I understand what they tested for. So for that whole process of testing documentation is critical for long-term success. If you want to upgrade 4 or 5, 6, 7 years down the road, you're going to need it. You're absolutely going to need it. And I find that 90% of the time it's not there. So that's another takeaway for the SCADA managers to make sure as they move forward, that is something that needs to have a serious attention paid to.
Great. Thank you, David. Jared, you're up.
Awesome. So I primarily work in the water and wastewater areas, but I do dabble a little bit in gas. Right now I'm working on some cool renewable gas projects for landfill to natural gas conversions. And in fact, I was on the phone earlier today talking about cybersecurity and adhering to the that corporation standards with our new SCADA system that we're putting in. And it's interesting talking about what's allowed and what's not. And one of our internal Jacobs OT folks were on that call, and he's kind of leading some of the highly technical details that are above my pay grade. But I wanted to start out, most of this presentation on, go and go back to the other slide.
Sorry about
most
that.
of the presentation is based on my experience with water and wastewater. And there's a bunch of different things going on that everybody knows about. Aging infrastructure is pretty much my bread and butter. My whole career, 15 years, has pretty much been retrofitting, ripping and replacing and upgrading SCADA systems, instrumentation. And I have kind of a unique experience being an 80s baby and watching the emergence of the internet and being obsessed with computers at a young age. And watching technology grow and grow and grow, and the complexity in the industrial automation market turn from more local-based control to cloud-based control, which is still a lot of resistance, and just watching that evolution over the years. One of the big things that face the industry are operating costs, inflation. It's getting more and more expensive to operate facilities, and with the highly technical nature of things today, virtualized servers, centralized platforms, automatic backup systems, and with the emergence of things like AI that are gobbling up the world's resources for data centers, it's getting more and more expensive to deploy these systems, to maintain them, and building out the infrastructure in a reliable sense to keep mission critical things going, like a lot of you face with gas operations and things like that. You can't just stop. A refinery might blow up. and so there's the thing that SBS and I started talking about is converging on the skilled staffing challenges. And so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide here. So Jacobs in particular, large engineering firm, we have an in-house operation and maintenance group where we operate 200 different sites for all sorts of different municipalities, cities, government. And we currently treat about 1 billion gallons a day, which is really neat. We have 3,000 O&M staff across these 200 projects that are dedicated O&M people. We have a huge interest in OT because everything that we operate, we design, build, operate, we're accountable for. And so there's a huge cybersecurity focus to make sure that we're not liable, and we're doing our due diligence to make sure that all the plants, the public health, the drinking water, the wastewater is contained and safe and cyber secure. And I wanted to bring that up because that lends a little bit of credibility to some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So let's go to the next one. And so again, most of my career has been ripping and replacing or upgrading uh, SCADA systems. And I started thinking about justification as to like, well, why do we need to replace these things? And how long before you actually need to start replacing things? And throughout my years, I've replaced SCADA systems for small remote Alaska islands of 8,000 people, villages up on the North Slope with 200 people, all the way up to in the Seattle area, their whole wastewater facilities that service over 1 million people. So I have a good experience from small to large and seen a lot over the years. And I started researching like, well, how long does a SCADA PLC controller typically last? What about field panels and instruments? So I came up with just kind of a quick snapshot guide, and this is changing. I think that about every 10 years, you probably need to upgrade your PLC controllers. And the reason is mostly because of the firmware. At some point, Rockwell, Allen Bradley, they just stop updating firmware revisions for their product because they have a new product line that's more modern and they still support it. So there's end of life to everything, as everybody knows. The OT network layer is interesting because it's about every 5 to 10 years that we see people actually upgrading their system. And typically it's because a lot of the upgrades are driven by, hey, we can't get parts anymore. It's end of life, and we're resorting to buying things on eBay, right? And so that's been interesting. The SCADA software and the Windows operating systems are increasingly seeming to get shorter and shorter duration. And so a lot of the industry, from my perspective, is driven by Microsoft operating system upgrades. Windows 10, I feel like it just came out. It was end of life in October of last year. And there's hundreds of thousands of computers and things out there in the industrial world that are still using Windows 10. I go to sites and I still see Windows 7, and every now and then you'll see something with Windows XP out there still. And it's like, hey, like there's no more security patching for these. And now you're starting to connect your systems up to the internet in some capacity. And so there's a huge need taking these life cycles, coming up with master plans, understanding, what are the cost impacts on these things for people out there. And with adding in all of this new OT, virtualized servers, and the next emergence, which is AI, it's just going to get more and more complicated. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so this is where the skilled staffing challenges come in. How do we take these legacy systems with all these different protocols, all these different technologies, mission critical things, and have the resources and support to actually install and maintain these things? And one thing that I'm from a small rural area growing up. Everyone over here takes pride in being self-sufficient. And I try to go into these projects with that type of mentality. How do we set up our clients for success when we upgrade a system and give them a level of self-sufficiency so they're not tied to a contractor and paying way higher for stuff that they can do in-house potentially? And I think that's where SBS has a really good angle here. And I was excited to kind of partner with them through this presentation and things we've been working on in the background. It's like when you hire someone who's a specialist from outside your organization and bring them in, that's great because you get someone with a ton of horsepower, but it also can discourage other people within your company that are looking for promotions. And so I always try to think like, well, how can we train an operator to help with some of like the reporting and trending things for accountability? Like what can we do there to bring people up and raise within our organization to increase our skill set and not feel like, hey, we're just plucking people from some highfalutin place and slapping them in, and now they're their boss and they have no idea of your company's culture, things like that. And it is a challenge, and there is no perfect solution. But with the product end of life accelerating, it seems like things are getting shorter and shorter, or maybe I'm just more aware of it. And then the convergence of enterprise and industrial networking is creating all sorts of complications where you need remote access for vendor support. Maybe you don't want to have to fly somebody out every time there's a problem with a vendor skid. And so how do you do that and accomplish that in a responsible way and also safeguard yourself from nation threats, other countries, cybersecurity. There's a lot there, and finding the people that can actually go and do that can be difficult. And if you don't have a solid in-house program or a centralized focus on it within your organization, it can be challenging. And that's where people like Jacobs and SBS can come as consultants and help out. But really, I would recommend anytime that you bring someone in, you want to find someone that has good, tried and true practices, practical experience, not just ideas, right? Because ideas are great, but when I go to put together, right now I'm putting together a cybersecurity and SCADA system, and we have 20 remote sites all across like a 1 hour driving distance. And the biggest problem that we have out there, or the client has, is communications. They have an old radio system. Their system was put in 1999, Y2K style. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, if most of your problem is just your communication, so how do we fix that? And so right now, like before this meeting, I'm putting together a diagram. Here's a primary cellular-based system for all of your remote sites across this whole region. How do we attach these little pump stations to the internet in a secure way? Well, what we like to do at Jacobs is pick some sort of firewall vendor. In this case, it's Fortinet. Out at every single site, we're putting a cellular-based Fortinet firewall with a local radio backup. And we're strategically planning this thing out where even if the cellular network goes down, we still have a local backup radio across the region to be able to talk. I'm not smart enough to go and configure those firewalls because that's not my forte. So I bring in my buddies who's an OT specialist who has tried and true experience, who's deployed these systems, who's an expert with something like Fortinet. He's helping me lay out the design and QCing and checking everything that I do to make sure that we're going in and we deliver this contract to this customer. We know that this is going to work because we've done it. And we already have a framework of policies that we've done 50 other times and lessons learned that we can apply to it. So anytime you bring a consultant in to help you with these subjects, I recommend really scrutinizing them. It's like if you're having a contractor work on your house, it's like, hey, let's see a portfolio of your work before we hire you, right? And so if you're not able to find ways to use a program like SBS to bring someone up in-house, if you do need to go in and hire a consultant, definitely do your due diligence. Before we change to the next slide, I want to talk about change management. And you guys, Tim and David, already kind of talked about this. I think that's the biggest hurdle that I've ran into over the past few years with a lot of this new technology. We're going into these 20-year-old systems, 30-year-old systems that are super neglected. We're standing up big network cabinets with virtualized servers, remote access, handing them iPads. And then you have, the operator nearing retirement who's like struggling. And so change management is a huge thing. Anytime that we're very sensitive to it within our own organization and our operational group, but I'm even more sensitive out there in the world when I'm working with these small utilities and things. It's like, how do we implement this technology and make sure that they have the training and the resources, and we're not just hammering them with a change? And I'm sure all of us have probably faced something in our business where there's a change to your computer and it just happens and it makes your life very inconvenient and you don't look very favorable to it. And so change management's a big thing. And I know SBS can help with that as well through their programs that they offer. One example that I like to talk about is eBay. One day, a long time ago, they used to have like a yellow background. One day they just changed it to white and everybody freaked out. They're like, we don't like it. The website looks different. You go to a website, it looks totally different. And one thing that eBay started doing is they reverted back, and then they started changing it a little shade at a time, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And over a course of time, they eventually did change it to white, but they did it so gradually that people didn't complain as much. And so that's what change management is. When you upgrade one of these systems, you introduce all this new AI technology stuff, whatever, remote access, iPads, doing it slowly and methodical and giving grace to the operational group and to people to absorb it is the best way, in my opinion. So let's go to the next slide. So what are the options? In-house staff training, I would always recommend first. Hire external staff, bring in a specialist, someone to come and help and manage, who can step into the role, gives you a lot of horsepower. You can hire a consultant or a contractor. And that's kind of what Jacobs does, is consulting. We'll go into a facility, do an as-built of everything that they have, learn what we can about their system, and then help them maintain their systems, for a service fee. But that's also very expensive. And then the last thing, which is kind of the new emergence, is leveraging technology. Just over the past decade or so, it's how do we utilize some of these new tools that are coming onto the market? And one really awesome thing is like automatic network monitoring. I'm still personally a little bit wary of AI. I don't want Copilot going and looking at my industrial system necessarily. But there's a lot of technology out there that can help alleviate some of the issues, especially with cybersecurity, automatic threat detection and reporting, all sorts of different things. And so those are the four options that I see. I would always recommend, again, in-house staff training if possible. If not, I'm a consultant, so I'd prefer you hire someone like us. But honestly, so yeah, these are different ways that we can help. I know SBS works has programs for staff recruitment and program management, change management. Jacobs has some really excellent solutions for cybersecurity, networking, OT consulting. One of my favorite things to do is SCADA master planning personally. I know SBS does this as well. It's coming up with a game plan and a roadmap for your system, 10 years, 20 years. What is it going to cost? When should you upgrade? What do you have out there? What are the challenges? What are the priorities of the organization? And building out a roadmap to get another 20 years out of the system. And that way it's year 7, you go, oh, hey, all of these network switches are end of life, and we need $200,000 across our 4 facilities that we weren't expecting. So master planning helps alleviate that and sets up an avenue for planned budget spending over time. Staff and O&M training, as well as kind of SBS's role as well. And then Jacobs has a really awesome advanced AI tools that we've developed in-house for our operational systems. And so let's go ahead and go to the last slide here. So even though I'm a little bit weary about any sort of AI in these industrial systems, I've been working closely with our technologies group that have been introducing our closed AI tools inside of our own organization. We partnered with Palantir, and about 2019, I started getting phone calls from people in our OT group like, hey, we want to go and hook up data recording to your 6 facilities that you manage. And I'm okay, well, for what? Oh yeah, we partnered with Palantir so we can start building AI tools. And back then I'm thinking like AI, like Siri sucks. But now I'm looking at it going, oh wow, I've seen the stuff that we've done and we've built. And so Jacobs is building a whole bunch of different tools that have actual cost savings. Energy consumption is the thing that I'm most excited about. So out at in Washington State at a wastewater plant that we operate, we hooked our AI tools up to the blower system and took all of the historical data from the plant, converted it into the LLM with all of the different data science that we have going on. And we were able to save 30% electricity over the course of the first year on the blowers alone, just by taking all of the upstream and downstream data and figuring out best case scenarios. And the way that it works is every 4 hours, the operators get a suggestion of set points for that piece of equipment. So the dissolved oxygen PID controls, they took all of the data, crunched it, and then every 4 hours they get a new set point if they need to adjust the set point. And what it does is it takes everything into context and it lowers the amount of electricity needed to maintain those same dissolved oxygen targets that are needed for compliance. And I'm seeing all sorts of different really cool use cases about it. And I'm really excited for us to introduce this to the private markets outside of just our internal organization. So I just wanted to mention that. kind of a fun thing that's coming up, and that's all I had to say for right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks so much, Dave. So these are the references for the studies that we used to kind of back up our prognostications, and we're open for questions.
Hey guys, thanks. That was awesome. We have about 7 minutes left. Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're recording this and it will be on the Gas Association YouTube channel, which you can reach through our website, and then which we'll share the link to the folks on the call
Yep.
later and make the presentation available to everyone that's on the call. The one question, we don't have any questions in the chat. Last call for questions for folks. One question I have is just out of curiosity, Tim, how do you guys work with Jacobs? What's the working relationship? What's the, how do you split responsibilities and such?
Sure. We're just teaming up. We each have our own areas of specialty. It's not a formal joint venture or anything like that. It's just we all know each other and trust each other and like working together.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And then say I'm on this call and I'm having problems getting the staff I need. What, besides calling you, what's kind of the next step? What's the process that you guys put people through to?
Right. Well, I think without a conversation, it's hard to know. But certainly, if you're running down that scenario of we're moving some of our IT functionality to the cloud and we're contemplating layoffs in our IT area, then that would be a direct. We already have a program that we implement to help people through that process, the change management process, as well as re-engineering folks to be more OT oriented. So